So yes, first off, I want to thank the Center for South Asia, especially Darshana, who walked in beautiful on time and at the right moment. Anarban for the invitation, as well as Sarah Abdullahi, and I'm sure many others for all the work they put in to make today's talk happen. And you, the in-person audience, who's just doubled in size, and the online audience, thank you. I'm so excited to share this research, and I very much look forward to your thoughts and questions. And I've left this up beforehand. We'll come back to the slide, don't worry, for some enjoyable banners from this multi-person blog, Sepia Mutiny. So today I want to share some insights from ongoing work on what I call coalitional South Asian America. And particularly, I want to focus on Sepia Mutiny, an incredibly popular multi-author blog that ran from 2004 to 2012 to consider the crucial role of open web era blogging in this particular racial project, and specifically because of this blog. So South Asian American is a coalitional identity label that encompasses people who live in the United States and Canada and trace their heritage directly or through circuitous paths like those depicted here to what are now the nation's right, they come to the United States and Canada directly or circuitously, but from the nations of the South Asian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, Afghanistan, and Myanmar, depending who you ask on what day and in what context. In my work, I examined 25 years of South Asian American digital media activism to map the coming into legibility of this new coalitional racial identity, that we can go from Apu being the only, South Asian American face on network television for decades that is consistent and sustains, even though he's written and voiced not by folks of South Asian heritage, to Hank Azaria apologizing on the Colbert Show in 2017, I want to say, and talking about we need to listen to South Asians. We need to listen to Indians in America. He's using them kind of interchangeably. We get to this phase where people start to call even Kamala Harris South Asian, whereas that's not a term I grew up knowing. Maybe other folks in the US have a different experience, but that was not something that I thought was common parlance. And so bringing that into legibility as something that is accessible for this community is something I'm so deeply interested in, and how making it available as a resource within this community, working to do that, is what makes it then usable outward to, fight for racial justice more broadly. So in doing so, I seek to reconfigure our understanding of connectivity on the one hand and the production of racialized identities on the other. So just to give you, some examples visually, the advocates of coalitional South Asian America leverage their placement at a crux in multiple scales of racialized capitalist empire to critique it and produce new solidarities with marginalized communities within and without, which is a really complicated task, right? It's a very internally complicated umbrella category, South Asian America, and it has a lot of complicated relationships with other ethnic, national, racial, religious, etc. groups. So this is made both possible and impossibly naughty, Knotty, not like Naugh, by South Asian Americans' complex, vacillating racialization at the multiple interacting scales that they're sort of working through. So examples could be the politically reactive podcast with W. Kamal Bell and Harikhan Debolu, both the book, The Gift of Our Wounds, and their organization Serve to Unite relates to a man whose father died in the Gurdwara shooting in Oak Creek, who connected after the fact with his with a person who helped start the what is the term, the neo-Nazi group that the person who ended up doing the murders associated himself with. And so they were trying to come together. Right, he himself was not a neo-Nazi at this point in time, and they were trying to think, how do we come together across difference? How do we help de-radicalize young people? They would be called into schools, for example, sometimes to help run workshops or to intervene in situations that schools were concerned were going to escalate. Bella's History Month, equality labs, things like that as well. So we can think about just a few of the scales at which South Asian Americans are placed in a fraught, turbulent racialization process, such as their use as a wedge between white and Black communities in the US, the monumental internal diversity and schisms within South Asian America, and so on. The complex, vacillating positioning of South Asian America, I argue, is also particularly revealing of the contemporary moment, meaning understanding their racialization processes and how they negotiate them can help us think through the impacts of rising ethno-nationalisms in North America and elsewhere, increasing global policy emphases on terrorism, technology, labor, access, and risk. Mobility, the porousness and interconnectedness of categories of othering, whether they be religious, linguistic, racial, or ethnic, the ways they are slippery, mobile, and multiscalar, and the ways they can reverberate and reinforce each other in mediated and online echo chambers, as well as in our daily lives. Internal recognition of this complex and fraught positionality for South Asian Americans is compounded by a popular and scholarly reality that race in America is often understood in the first instance as a white-Black binary, with some attention to brownness in relation to Middle Eastern, Arab, or Muslim identities, coming more to the fore, especially post 9/11, and some attention to brownness in relation to Hispanic, Chicana, Latinx identities, which has been particularly salient of late, yet the white-Black binary remains central. And even within the neglected category of Asian American, in that white-Black binary, South Asian Americans are only recently coming to even be popularly recognized as Asian Americans. And there's, you can even see the difficulty with which people navigate that just talking about Kamala Harris, that they kind of, to talk about her as Black and Asian American and South Asian American and part of a Jewish household all at once is like, kind of, they can't hold it all together. Like, I'm sort of shocked she didn't get more anti-Semitism while she was in office, because they're like, we're too busy being mad that she's like a woman and Black and Asian American or South Asian American or both of those things. Right? Different people had feelings about whether she counted as each of those categories really. Leading into the early 2000s, mainstream images of South Asian Americans were dominated by their own particular inflection of the yellow peril model minority dialectic that Kwai speaks about so eloquently, that impacts Asian American representation more broadly. Images of racist hate and racist love, evoking the line from Chin and Chan 1972. So you have spelling bee winners and terrifying Orientalist nightmares, techies and terrorists, exceptional Americans and Canadians, and that their supposed nature as hardworking, polite, and apolitical makes them exemplars of the American dream, and their permanent foreignness make them exceptions to cultural and legal citizenship. To tech CEOs, all of the above. And for decades, particularly for South Asian Americans, actors of various backgrounds, and including people from South Asian American backgrounds, were pressured to put on goofy nonsense accents to play Indian immigrants who are non-threatening, apolitical, hardworking, and sexually political, often in the case of, say, Taj from Ben Wilder or Raj from The Big Bang Theory. Peter Sellers' 1968 brown-face role, he's a British comedian, as Hrundi Vibrakshi in The Party is a key touchstone for this trope. Hank Azaria has stated that that is part of where the Apu accent directly comes from. So just reminding us that that exists, because I think it's only in light of that it is clear how much of a breath of fresh air Sepia Mutiny was, how much of a lifeline for a lot of people. In the face of all of this, the advocates of coalitional South Asian America build complex, interconnected solidarities. A glance at some of the multi-person blog Sepia Mutiny's ever-changing and sometimes user-submitted banners from 2004 to 2012, and there are many, many more of them, reflects the limits and possibilities of these efforts and the degree to which they are intimately tied to media and media events. Here we see references to Indian cinemas and stars such as Amitabh Bachchan, Bol Puri, the film Kisna, American and British films about cultural clash and interracial romance such as East is East, quotidian cultures like clubbing, taking auto rickshaws, and familiar toy soldiers, reimagined in this case as patriotic and valiant Sikh Americans, the conversational and transnational influence of American and Indian civil rights leaders, the shared grief and shock of a media event like the loss of Kalpana Chawla in 2003, the Columbia shuttle disaster. So just even a sample of this. Notably, many of these snapshots are suffused with this a tinge of, as the title of Sepia Mutiny insinuates, sepia-colored nostalgia. And the specificity of coalitional South Asian America as a strategic umbrella category only comes in really into relief in the aggregate of these references. Any of them alone is insufficient. You need to see the networking and connecting across all of these ideas to get a sense of this community. So let's dive into the blog, you guys. I argue that Sepia Mutiny filled a critical need, establishing a complex space of dialogue and belonging for a generation of people to imagine themselves as South Asian Americans. The simultaneous impossibility and necessity of naming this community was used as a generative fuel to build a polyvocal, provocative, playful movement that was sustainable and inspiring for its participants. Even though the website ends in 2012, its effects linger on. Powerfully, Sepia Mutiny managed to foster a community that could understand itself as, on the one hand, ordinary and legitimate, and on the other hand, radically coalitional, both within and outside South Asian America. And this is just one version. This is using a snapshot from the Wayback Machine, so it's actually a composite of different aspects of what it would have looked like in 2009. But you can get a sense of some of the different tabs that they had and options and how they integrated in the ongoing comments to the threads, the posts, Twitter feeds, you could send tips, and so on. And the banner, eventually one of the longer running banners is this pen in place of the I in Sepia Mutiny, but it is just one among so many. So following a brief playful post on July 30th, 2004, the blog began posting regular content starting a week later on August 7th, 2004, putting out 173 posts in August of 2004. This period notably falls between the Democratic and Republican national conventions of that year. At the latter, Arun Venugopal, who was covering the convention for Indian publication Rediff.com, I've never said it out loud. I think it's Rediff, but okay, if anybody has a different pronunciation, let me know. Was detained for hours and became aware of Sepia Mutiny's existence because they covered that incident. So he found out that they were covering him because he himself was being detained at the convention. Abhi Tripathi, one of the sort of key conveners of Sepia Mutiny, had also been paying attention to Venugopal and one other South Asian heritage reporter as the lone South Asian voices reporting on the DNC and run up to the 2004 presidential election. It was in this climate that Tripathi began to email other South Asian American bloggers he admired who had been writing about politics with proposition. As Anna John explains in an exit interview episode of the South Asian Journalists Association's podcast hosted by Venugopal and Sri Srinivasan, she says, quote, "That's how you reached out to us, because I'd written about one or two events, and I think Manish had as well, and you approached us with that email. You were like, I have so many friends that are undecided, and yet when I forward them your links, they suddenly have a clear sense of the person they want to vote for. And wouldn't it be great if all of this was in one centralized location?" It was absolutely inspired by campaign shenanigans in 2004, the Michigan GOP's offensive outsourcing website, a Desi photojournalist of Desi descent being barred from a Bush Cheney event because she had a funny sounding name or something. I first blogged about this on my personal blog. Manish had as well. I think Vinod may have. So we were all doing it on our own. And it was Abhi who said it would be so much more powerful if we consolidated this and had one site for people to come to and learn about this. While politics, so that's the end of the quote. While politics were certainly involved in the inception and duration of this transformative blog, they were a necessary but insufficient ingredient. As well as current anger and political motivation, the mutineers relied on an existing network of bloggers and a critique they had been building for years without a venue to fully voice and explore it. When they came together, it was not to be the arbiter of South Asian American public opinion, but rather to be a community who sometimes didn't always agree or, fully see eye to eye. A digital center of gravity for a group of disparate people longing for a place they felt was for them. And so just to give you a sense of these early and key bloggers, Abhi is the convener. Anna John is hugely important in the management of the community, especially moderation. Vinod and Manish are also, early members. Ennis This is a pseudonym. Enis Singh Mutiniwala joins pretty soon thereafter. Amardeep Singh, who's an English professor, he later becomes a key figure and therefore is in this top level of major mutineers or bloggers. But it would come to have more than 60 contributors over the years. And I'll note that both Anna John and Enis are pseudonymous, and they were later doxxed, as was a third blogger for the site, with either, in the case of Anna John, her full name coming out, and then her parents' address and things like that. With Enis, his actual name, Taz Ahmed, they also doxed her full name. So it was not without risk. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of posts, and they could widely range. Some of them were very short, but some of them were very long and very detailed. And the top 5 folks, I think, created more than 3,000 of the posts on the website. To give you a more fine-grained look here, I know, numbers don't tell us everything, but they can give us a broad sense. So you can see that even though some of the posts are incredibly short, the average, word count per post in any given year was often above 3,000 words for the post. And then they might have, this is an average number of comments. So if the average is 90 in 2007, you can imagine that range is quite wide. And then the responses in the comments themselves were sometimes, some people would write short things, but some people would write hundreds or thousands of words per comment. So it is, in some sense, because there wasn't the social media web and the visually, as visually stimulating web, Instagram, and things where this kind of discourse was being sucked into either walled gardens of private Facebook groups or to places that were sort of more about the aggregation of attention to a mainstream social media website. This was a really substantive kind of discussion and conversation that is just kind of unthinkable today, to be honest. Over its 8-year run, CP Mutiny 60+ bloggers produced nearly 5,500 posts. The numbers kind of are hard to be certain of because some of them have been deleted over time, and then the whole site is down now, although there are archived versions of it. For example, at the South Asian American Digital Archive, it's pretty buggy, not gonna lie. With up to 197 posts a month, sometimes hundreds, even thousands comments per post, up to 16,000 plus unique visitors per day at its height. Visitors were based mostly in the US, roughly 70%, but with sizable readership abroad, particularly in Europe, South Asia, and Canada. Despite mischaracterizations by the likes of the New York Times that its focus was geographical, CP Mutiny often is being described, people were like, it's a South Asian blog, which is like, it's really not. It's very South Asian American, which is not quite a place. CP Mutiny was about aggregating a set of South Asian American perspectives in one place. To the degree the site's investments could be roughly called geographical, they were multi-level, intersectional, and deeply contested. They both reinforced and confounded given designations and divides of various kinds. So you can think about scales in terms of like internationally regional, like South Asia is a region, or the Tamil diaspora in Asia. Internationally, so like within a nation, South India or North India would be, that kind of level of region. Religious, linguistic, transnational, sort of maybe like an example would be the worldwide Tamil diaspora that also includes Canada and the US, and forged a fraught but invigorating polyvocal public in the process. And they were quoted, as you can see, in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of India. Abhi went on the BBC at one point on a TV show. No site was more central to producing a popular commitment to being South Asian American, even if it repeatedly recognized that any specific designation was insufficient and impossible. Actively recognizing this impossibility was part of its bid to make a mutinous imaginative locus of belonging, as suggested by posts like, "Which term do you prefer?" From 2004, which garnered 19 comments. "Speaking of self-description, South Asian," which Amardeep worked into a beautiful journal article I highly recommend, with 409 comments. "What is brown desi to you?" Garnering 52 comments, and so on. Blogger Tanzila Taz Ahmed explained in her final post on CP Mutiny as it closed shop, the site provided a much needed space to dialogue and develop the South Asian American identity, and in many ways set the benchmark with how the community voiced ourselves. The production of identification, belonging, and a jumping off point for collective action is not only enhanced by, but requires space for discussion, difference, and personal and community development. I'm sorry, I should have said where the quote ended. I did a bad job. So her quote specifically is, this site provided a much needed space to dialogue and develop the South Asian American identity, and in many ways set the benchmark with how the community voiced ourselves. And then I write, the production of identification, belonging, and a jumping off point for collective action is not only enhanced by, but requires space for discussion, difference, and personal community development. In that final post, she mentioned, I always approach blogging on the site with three things in mind: write about the Desi American experience, the narrative I was yearning for, a one-to-one ratio of pop to politics posts, and find the marginalized Desis and give them space. Using a non-hierarchical model, the editorial mandate was simple. 90% of each blogger's post had to cover things of interest to South Asians living in North America, according to Amardeep Singh. And some of this is, news coverage of them. Some of this comes from interviews they did online, but I also interviewed many of the mutineers and have run roundtables with them as well. So some of this is from personal interviews and communication. Otherwise, bloggers were given wide latitude to write about what interested them, leading to a heady, according to Kishore Vikas, Philly Girl, mixture of the serious and the popular. And I would also say, no one was given stories to write. So sometimes if somebody had already, like, three people could write on the same news event that's breaking, and they would only know when someone hit publish, and then they might cancel writing theirs, or they might still write their own. And that was totally fine. And that was part of this sort of raucous mutiny that was happening. Writing in another post a couple years earlier, Ahmed stated, I write on CP Mutiny to tell the counter narrative. Quote, I write on CP Mutiny to tell the counter narrative of our South Asian American community. We are putting words in the form of a blog to narrate our community, end quote. So building South Asian America in the early 2000s was an ongoing and imaginative project, and CP Mutiny was absolutely on the front line. According to my research, also just according to so many people when I tell them about this research who were online at that time in these communities, and it just meant so much to them. They just light up. They're just so excited. So posts range from pop culture commentary and activist happenings to global, local, and national politics, from philosophical musings on South Asian American reality TV show contestants to fractious discussions on immigration, the war on terror, and how to ethically respond to human rights crises around the world. Although started by Indian Americans, the mutineers, what the bloggers called themselves, came to include people of Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan, and European descent, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, and unaffiliated, straight and queer, Republicans and Democrats, novelists, DJs, tech entrepreneurs, journalists, activists, lawyers, artists, rocket scientists, and so on. This was not by accident. This was not just something that happened, but involved serious effort among its founders and mutineers to seek out and support bloggers with backgrounds different from their own. Critical gaps were acknowledged, such as the lack of bloggers from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or people who were not Hindu or not Muslim, people who were from discriminated caste backgrounds, and so on. New bloggers and invested commenters were observed and offered a chance to guest blog before they were inducted as contributing mutineers, and they were closely supported once they joined, particularly knowing, right, that if they're bringing in people who have identities that are marginalized within this umbrella community, that's going to involve extra labor to make sure they are safe, to make sure they feel welcome and cared for when the trolls are going to come. And unfortunately, as the years went on, the trolls got terrible. That is one of the reasons, as well as the rise of the social web. The vitriolic, Islamophobic, sexist, etc. hate was palpable and hit certain mutineers much harder than others. Like it landed on them more than others. Seeking editorial independence, the site never took ads and was too early to be part of the subscription social internet era. A couple of the founders who had made some money during the dot-com boom of the 1990s covered most of the early and ongoing server and web hosting costs, and 5 PayPal donation drives over CP Mutiny's early 8-year run bolstered its funds. Early on, it was hand-coded by the people who started it, and then continued to be coded and managed and administrated through volunteers. And just to give a slightly more depth to that, the word count per post, but also to comments per post, right, ranging from 0 to 1347, which that is an undercount because that would have been after things were deleted because they were very offensive or derailing or something. And then you could see word count per post could go up to nearly 37,000 words. People who do academic publishing, that's half a monograph or so. And that was not, that one is aberrant, but I think you can imagine there are a lot of other ones that are very high in number as well. You can see the mean and median as well. So yeah, I mean, the juggernaut, some people would say this is like something that tries to recuperate some of the sense of the CP Mutiny, mixed results. They hailed this as America's front page. There is no shortage of responses I could quote of how much this means to people. I don't know where my life would have ended up if it weren't for CP Mutiny. I for sure never would have known there was a South Asian community of like-minded people out there, and we were all hungry for our stories to be told. A lot of people talk about that a lot of the activities in their childhood, in their community, at their school were about dance or religion, or you're not supposed to bring politics into it. And so where did you go to meet the other South Asian Americans who desperately needed to talk about not literally always politics, but in the sense that everything is political, as a feminist belief that everything is political, the ways that all of our lives are political. And so that this was that moment. And it was really felt, particularly they had meetups a number of times, and people were just, sometimes crying, over the emotion. People met, people they later married through CP Mutiny and through meetups and so the meetup events they had. So yeah, my love and gratitude for CP Mutiny is eternal, a beautiful, vulnerable space where I learned that I could bask in my brownness and still be a weirdo, where I built an amazing virtual and even in real life community. I miss the meetups. My favorite source of sharp commentary on community politics, etc. That's a cricket related journalist, often India, but not always based. CPU was such an important part of me finding my voice, eternally grateful. Also love the one meetup I went to. If it kept you sane, for some people, it kept them sane after 9/11, they said. Singularly responsible for sending some people to grad school. DJ Rekha, if you know, has publicly posted about it, as well as I'll mention a handful of other sort of South Asian American stars and celebrities. And at a roundtable I organized with, including Amardeep Singh, he wrote, "Macaca and Apu will be denounced." Macaca was a term used against South Asian American public figure in the 2000s in the midst of political stuff. So they made shirts about it, like reclaiming it and making fun of it. Macaca and Apu will be denounced, Hindutwadi trolls will be banned, and the emergence of a South Asian American voice in mainstream American life will be documented. Okay, so we can only dig in so many ways in the limited time that we have. But to dig into the name especially, CP Mutiny references sepia, the hues of brown of aging photographs, and the first United South Asian military effort against the British, also known by other names such as the Indian Rebellion of 1857 or the First War of Independence. The blog title refuses to name a specific South Asian country as a source of affiliation, prioritizing revolt and brownness over geographical identifiers. They even avoided the very popular term Desi, although they were quite tempted by it. The term itself, right, doesn't mean the same thing in in all diaspora communities. It doesn't mean the same thing in diasporas in the subcontinent. It also, derives from North Indian languages, so it can feel exclusionary to South Indian, South Asians who are more from of Dravidian language origin, and familial background. The title CP Mutiny highlights brownness as a unifying and racially coalitional concept. The title suggests, with its connotation of nostalgia, the maintenance of ineffable yet meaningful connections that warp but also last, and that's really powerful, even sometimes deepening over time. It plays on the British rather than subcontinental name for the historical event, the Sepoy Mutiny, signifying a greater familiarity with diasporic terms, so that it is very much more South Asian American than South Asian. A desire to confront potentially legacies of colonization, and an appeal to be or start mutinies. That, for Anna John, for example, she felt that every banner they put out was its own little mutiny, that every post could be a mutiny, and that was the goal, was to incite mutinies, to incite a mutinous spirit. So these are, this is the top 10, and then the next one is the next top 10 most commented posts in history, just to give you a sense. Some of them are pretty self-evident, but to give you a hint, are you in an Avial relationship? John contemplates joining Facebook and is convinced of its merits when she learns of the Facebook group for Indians whose partner is Indian, but is from a different state in India or is from a different religion or caste. This type of relationship can't be called interracial, so it can be called Avial relationship, which is a South Indian mixed veg dish with, I think, often a coconut sauce base. Let's see, Singh, Can't Buy Me Love discusses an academic paper about how money, race, and height impact online dating prospects. Kavya is Innocent. That was really tense. Kavya Vishwanathan's young adult novel, How Opal Mehta Got Kissed, Got Wild, and Got a Life, came under heavy scrutiny for significant plagiarism from a variety of sources. Written while she was in high school, the book came out while Vishwanathan was a sophomore at Harvard, and the discourse abounded, shall we say. You are Christians and fools. John, a Catholic, castigates protesters who consider themselves patriots and Christians for trying to shoot down the first Hindu clergyman to offer the morning prayer for the US Senate. On another post, I believe, given up hiding and started to fight, John details 3 incidents from different schools she attended as a child where she was marked as Indian, as in foreign, by her teachers and peers, asked to explain their stereotypes and misunderstandings of what that meant, and ostracized for their misunderstandings. She then compares how that felt to realizing the women bloggers and commenters on Jezebel, while smart, defiant, and allergic to bullshit, she says, and fierce on many subjects, could be just as ignorant and cruel as her childhood tormentors when it came to discussing news related to India. Siddhartha here is the post humorously responds to a BBC article titled "Condoms Too Big for Indian Men." Ahmed Taz with Sepia Destiny muses on the rules for dating bases and jokes that Sepia Mutiny should open a tab that's called Sepia Destiny, and it's a dating part of their website. Tripathi Abhi, When Landlords, etc., he is discussing a Christian Science Monitor article on the preference of many landlords to not rent to single women in India, although they mind less if the women in question are white. And the last one, Puma, is a play on Ma as in mother, as well as the acronym PUMA, Party Unity My ASS. So that, I think it just gives you a sense of kind of the breadth of things that are happening here. So connecting theories of racialization, diaspora, and publics, my work highlights that diasporic networks and connectivity are unstable, contingent, gritty, needing to be constantly renewed and rearticulated, but therefore generative and rearticulable, central to racialization and identity processes, and crucially depend on massive amounts of daily unremarked yet remarkable cultural labor. A month and a half after, I'll leave that up for a second if you want. A month and a half after CP Mutiny's closure on April 1st, 2012, 3 of its founders spoke on the South Asian Journalists Association podcast, giving an exit interview. Saja member and journalist R.N. Venugopal, a regular contributor to NPR with ties to other publications, including the New York Times, PBS, and The Guardian, framed the import of CP Mutiny, stating, for much of the nearly 8 years of its existence, CP Mutiny was a singular phenomenon tackling just about every South Asian diasporic issue there was, serious or inane. In the process, it established itself as a model of intelligent, interactive blogging and the voice of a generation. Those of us who worked elsewhere in the Desi media, including at Saja, looked on the South Asian Journalist Association, looked on with a combination of admiration and envy. How are they so prolific? What makes their readers so damn smart? How do they get so many comments? C.P. Mutiny was an orienting phenomenon in his life, now resoundingly absent when he was recording this exit interview. He emphasizes that when he went there for what he went there for was not just the posts written by specific bloggers, but the diversity, intensity, and intelligence of the comments. He did not go there for one perspective on breaking news, events, and popular culture. He went there for a complete picture, a world's view, a South Asian American view, with a variety of intelligent voices, including reader voices. When asked by Venugopal in the same podcast how and when the founders knew the site was a big deal, the mutineers first joked about finding out that the CIA and the State Department had listed CP Mutiny as recommended reading, evidently to help one build an understanding of South Asian and South Asian American culture. They discussed how they had repeatedly come to find South Asian and South Asian American celebrities, Kal Penn, Aziz Ansari, Anushka Shankar, were avid readers and sometimes commenters. Even non-South Asian American public figures dropped by, as when sociologist Robert Putnam responded to a post about his newly released research on diversity and civic engagement, and said specifically that he was like flabbergasted by how meaningful the discourse was, how deeply they were debating his work, like very carefully. In the comments as well as in the post. Some South Asian heritage celebrities diplomatically left unnamed by my informants wanted to be mutineers, but were always politely turned down. The bloggers in their posts had even been quoted in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of India, with founder Tripathi once appearing on a BBC radio show. These were secondary matters to them, however, instead, Tripathi spoke with excitement about how when the BBC or New York Times came to the site for, say, commentary on the Dutch Muhammad cartoon controversy or Benazir Bhutto's assassination, such papers of record quoted the blog. The commenters to the post were getting cited, he said. The comments themselves were the source of so much intelligence and learning, and around that time, that's when I thought, this is big. The community is generating ideas. Pseudonymous Ennis continued on this theme, noting that the blog was even sometimes one or two steps ahead of the mainstream media in its reporting. Putnam himself wrote, "Please forgive an outsider for listening in," he begins, "but this is the most serious and thoughtful of the dozens of blog discussions of my paper that I've seen so far." He was the 60th of 97 posts of the comments on that post. And then went on to discuss methods forthwithing. Most tellingly, Anna John finishes his anecdote by picking up on the thread of an active and contentious readership. In relation to a scandal eventually covered by the New York Times, in which an Indian-American Harvard undergraduate student's novel was found to be largely plagiarized, which we talked about before, Kavya, Anna John wrote a post asking for patience and calm while the facts were coming to light. In response to that post, she received hate mail on every side of the issue. Detractors of the plagiarist and of the supporters, variously asserting it was Anna John's regional or nationalist or religious bias, which led to Anna's shameful actions of asking for people to wait for the facts to come out. She recalled with stinging clarity how one person expressed their displeasure by referencing a separate heartbreaking post she had written about a traumatic incident during her college years. The angry emailer wrote, quote, "I used to feel sorry for you, but now I'm glad you got raped. You deserved it," end quote. Because according to the complainant, Anna's post asking for patience meant she was plagiarism. I can't overemphasize how much emotional, affective, and physical and digital labor was involved in keeping the site running. Right? Anna John recounts that her labor involved ideation, writing, fact-checking, link-checking, emotionally preparing herself for the onslaught of comments and the work of moderation, and then moderating her very popular posts and those of other bullied bloggers who she wanted to protect and support, who are often, femme-presenting or Muslim or something like that. So, Abhi Tripathi claimed that at its height, he was spending 6 to 7 hours a day on CP Mutiny. Anna John puts the number more at 15 to 18 hours a day during the blog's peak in 2007. That it was just, even while she was doing a full-time job. CP Mutiny advocated for the concept of South Asian America while subverting its most salient critiques, that South Asia is a shallow term born of upper middle-class diasporic political correctness, or from the State Department. It is a thinly veiled cover for India, thus for Indian Americans and for Hindu hegemony, and among Indians, North Indian hegemony, that like the adoption of many pan-ethnic coalitions, it would lead the community to focus exclusively on politics at home in the US, taking the sting out of its critique of issues abroad. I do not mean to suggest that they overcame all of these limitations, and doing so advocated for, South Asian America. But rather that they put a tremendous amount of elaborate, sustained, and often effective labor behind maintaining a space where it was possible to subvert them, where it was encouraged to repeatedly confront them, and that this is critical in building a set of publics that bring the concept of South Asianness and South Asian Americanness into a more popular and personal legibility than ever before. In other words, the only way Sepia Mutiny could successfully advocate for the concept of South Asian America as a living, breathing identity and community was by constantly critiquing it. Only in doing so is Sepia Mutiny able to produce a space where South Asian Americanness could be articulated in an interconnected identity, co-constituted variously through a complex of affiliations at multiple political and geographical scales. In so many ways, Sepia Mutiny has deep resonance with Nancy Fraser's crucial articulation of counterpublics. She defines them as, quote, parallel discursive arenas where members of subordinated social groups invent and circulate counter-discourses, which in turn permit them to formulate oppositional interpretations of their identities, interests, and needs. What then is revealing about this case study? First, it helps us consider the varieties of intentional and elaborate mid-level curatorial and affective labor that go into the maintenance of publics, as well as deliberation, authorship, and discussion. It helps us better understand how geographies of belonging in both their physical and conceptual aspects are key parts of so-called virtual communities, not identitarian additions to more universal and fundamental characteristics. Indeed, as Tripathi explains in the long comment discussion that follows Singh's post, questioning the value of South Asian as a means of self-description, identity is contextual and multiple. One identity term does not mean more to him than another, but are all meaningful in different contexts. Meaning is produced out of the negotiation between terms taken up in multiple registers. Sepia Mutiny emphasizes multiplicity and refusal of closure, allowing us to more deeply consider deliberate, non-deliberative, and non-decision-based idioms of expression in relation to publics. Sepia Mutiny also reminds us that the formation of contentious publics is not only crucial against authoritarian regimes, but internal contention is necessary for the production of identities in publics. Indeed, in the case of Anna John's appreciation for her disturbing hate mail, we see contention and multiplicity are at times far more important than deliberation. It implies how all publics, including those with enough hegemonic dominance to be considered the public, to be perceived as unitary and univocal, are constituted through the concerted interplay of smaller publics. Indeed, that is the trick of hegemonic publics. Their dominance allows them to seem like the public with its public opinion, rather than a complex negotiation among many contesting formations. Sepia Mutiny was not one public then, but produced by the many people who came to read only certain bloggers or sought to self-identify and organize around terms other than South Asian American, like Desi or Brown or Indian or Pakistani, etc. Polyvocal publics are not merely additive or publics constituted of multiple smaller publics or publics with ornamentation laid on top of universal concerns and identities. This maps usefully onto Vijay Prasad's argument for polyculturalism over multiculturalism. And there are many scholars you can turn to for really solid critiques of shallow multiculturalism, right? He says multiculturalism, in my estimation, emerged as a liberal doctrine destined to undercut the radicalism of anti-racism. Instead of anti-racism, we are fed a diet of cultural pluralism and ethnic diversity, end quote. For example, he says, quote, in Thatcherite England, the turn to ethnicity from around the time of the Festival of India in the early 1980s took some steam out of the omnibus anti-colonial political category of Black, end quote. In other words, the ascendance of more pleasant categories of difference, such as ethnicity and diaspora, often allows for a simultaneous turn away from forthright discussions of race and racism, obscuring power relations. Instead of multiculturalism, Prashad and others advocate for polyculturalism, or other ways they modify the word multiculturalism. He bases his on Robin Kelly's concept of polyrhythms. Many different rhythms operate together to produce a whole song. Polyvocal blogging similarly produces a new whole in the form of Sepia Mutiny. He continues explaining that a polycultural sees the world as constituted by the interchange of cultural forms, while multiculturalism sees the world as already constituted by different and discrete cultures that we can then place into categories and study with respect, and thereby retain 1950s relativism and pluralism in a new guise. The polyculturalist thus sees difference not as something additive or extra, but as the meat of the world. I could go on, but I think you get what I'm going for. Although the constant effort toward multiplicity made building and managing Sepia Mutiny laborious, and in long run impossible, the mutineers showed not only that they could sustain polyvocality, but also that it was necessary, beautiful, and deeply fulfilling. So to remind us where we started and why Sepia Mutiny is important, it is through the raucous, generative, contentious, connective community that Sepia Mutiny became the seeds of coalitional South Asian America, could grow and then bloom. And appreciating this, how South Asian American creatives leverage the tools of the open web to create Sepia Mutiny, and that's the general phenomenon helps us better understand Asian America and the South Asian American diaspora, or the South Asian diaspora more broadly, that is partly American and partly not, gives us finer purchase on race relations in the 2000s and the role of media more broadly, and it helps us better appreciate the role of sociality in digital cultures, especially in the immense labor of producing and moderating sociality. Thank you. And thank you. The alarm was for 40 minutes. This was for 40.